Hello, I'm Dr. Valerie Masuda. I'm a palliative care physician, and welcome to Tea with Val. Today, we're going to talk about advanced care planning, or ACP. An advanced care plan is kind of like the fire extinguisher or an insurance policy. You don't really want to ever have to use it, but when you need it, it's there. So an advanced care plan is what you want for your medical care should you be unable to make that or voice that conversation yourself. So this used to be termed maybe a living will or an advance directive, but these were not very helpful. You went to a lawyer, you had a living will done, and then that living will lived in somebody's filing cabinet or the lawyer's filing cabinet. And when we really needed it, it wasn't available. This is the same thing as an advance directive. So we now have an advanced care plan, which is actually a conversation. If you arrive at the emergency department and something terrible has happened to you and you can't actually tell the physicians what your wishes are, we will turn to somebody else in the hopes that that person understands what your goals and priorities are and how you would want your medical care to align with those goals and priorities. So, for example, if you're 20 years old, you may have a conversation with your mother and say, "Hey Mom, I'm going out on my motorbike and I really like going out on my motorbike, but if I'm ever hit by a logging truck and I show up in the emergency department and I can no longer move anything from my head down, I would need a tube in my throat to breathe, I would need a tube in my tummy to feed. I don't want that life, and I would prefer you to let me die naturally." That is an advanced care conversation. If you were 30 years old and you had a heart attack, you can talk to your spouse and say, "Hey, if I have a heart attack, I would want everything done. I would want CPR, I would want to go to the intensive care unit, I may even want to be on a ventilator for a short time because I know that I'm pretty fit, and if something like that happened to me, my chances of recovering are pretty good." But what if you're 80 or 90 years old and you're quite frail? You might be a good 80 or a good 90-year-old, but if something really terrible happened to you, like a massive stroke or an accident, if you were that sick that you needed to go to the intensive care unit, it is unlikely that you would be able to recover, and you may end up dying attached to machines. So you may have a conversation with your spouse, or maybe it's a friend, or maybe it's your brother, and say, "You know, if something like that happens to me, I would rather be supported for natural dying and kept comfortable." Where you already have a life-limiting diagnosis, then you may choose to make a decision based on your level of frailty. You may be very robust, and this is early in a cancer diagnosis, so you may choose to have intensive care unit type treatments like mechanical ventilation or not. If you have life-limiting illness and you're very frail, then the chances of recovery are really low if you needed intensive care. In fact, you may spend your sacred time of dying attached to machines. And so these are considerations for you. If you have a health representation agreement which names an individual who you trust to make those decisions based on your wishes, then they should be able to come to the hospital and let your care providers know what your wishes are. That person should be listed as your primary contact in case of an emergency. If you don't have a health representative, then there is an order of hierarchy in which we would turn to for that information. So for example, if you were a young adult, we would turn to your parents for that conversation. If you were an older adult, we would first turn to your spouse. And if your spouse said they did not want to make that decision, we would then turn to your children if they were old enough. And if they weren't old enough, we would turn to your parents. If your parents were not living, we would turn to your siblings. And all these people would have equal say. So if we turn to your siblings, all your siblings together would have an equal say in what they felt would be in your best interests. And if you had to turn to your children, then all your children would have a say of what they think would be in your best interest. You may have a particular child that knows you very well, or a particular sibling, or even a friend. So I would recommend that you find out what kind of forms you need to fill out to name that person as your health representative. So in the case that you need that, we know who to turn for that direction. And that's what advanced care planning is. It's about a conversation with the person that you know the best. And it's important for you to have those conversations and not to leave those things to the intuition of the person that you think knows you best. Because generally speaking, people will defer to the highest possible care. It's very hard for somebody to make the decision to withhold care or to pull the plug. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of guessing, what should I do? So in all fairness to your loved ones, it is important to have these conversations. So I hope that you take this information and have a cup of tea with your loved one or your friend or your sibling to have that conversation and exchange the conversation so you both know.